Metro General Hospital's emergency room was always chaotic, but tonight felt different. Under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the symphony of controlled chaos played out, stretcher wheels squeaking, monitors beeping relentlessly, and doctors barking urgent commands. It was a cold November night, 11:47 p.m., when the ambulance bay doors burst open once again. Marcus Webb walked in, quiet, almost invisible. He was 28 years old, average height, lean build, and unremarkably plain in appearance. His dark blue paramedic uniform was slightly faded, his boots worn, and his face carried that permanent expression of exhaustion that made people assume he was weak and inexperienced. He pulled his equipment bag behind him, eyes downcast, carefully avoiding eye contact with anyone. At the nurse's station, Tiffany, a sharp-tongued 25-year-old RN with perfectly styled hair and an attitude to match, elbowed her colleague Sarah and nodded toward Marcus. "Look who's back." "Marcus the Mouse," she said in a deliberately loud whisper. "Third time this week he's brought in a patient that wasn't even critical. Complete waste of our time." Sarah giggled, covering her mouth with her perfectly manicured hand. "I heard he panics during codes. Like actually freezes. How is he even still employed?" "Diversity hire, probably," Tiffany replied with a dismissive wave. "Or they feel sorry for him. Either way, he shouldn't be in emergency medicine. Maybe try a retirement home, Marcus?" Her voice carried across the ER. Several staff members turned, smirking. Marcus heard every word. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. He simply continued walking toward Trauma Bay 3, his patient stretcher being wheeled ahead by his partner, Jake. Dr. Richard Brennan, the ER's most decorated physician and biggest ego, looked up from his charts. At 45, Brennan was tall, silver-haired, and convinced of his own brilliance. He'd worked at Metro General for 15 years and ruled the ER like a tyrant. "Webb," he called out sharply. "Please tell me you didn't bring me another anxiety attack thinking it's a heart attack." Laughter rippled through the nearby staff. Marcus stopped, turned slowly, and spoke in his characteristically quiet voice. "Elderly male, 68, chest pain radiating to left arm, diaphoretic, BP 180/110, history of—" "Save it," Brennan cut him off with a wave. "I'll assess when I get there. You paramedics always overdramatize. It's probably gas." More snickers from the peanut gallery. Marcus's partner Jake, a louder, more confident paramedic, stepped forward defensively. "Doc, you should really listen to—" "I said I'll handle it," Brennan snapped. "You two can leave. We'll take it from here." Marcus placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder, a silent signal to stand down. They transferred the patient and began gathering their equipment. As they headed toward the exit, Tiffany called out mockingly, "Thanks for the delivery, Mouse. Try bringing us something exciting next time." The automatic doors hadn't even fully closed behind them when the trauma bay's monitor began alarming loudly. The elderly patient's heart rhythm was deteriorating rapidly. "Detach. Ventricular tachycardia. A deadly arrhythmia. Get the crash cart." Brennan shouted, suddenly not so confident. "Now." But Marcus and Jake were already gone, disappearing into the cold November night. That was the moment everything changed. Outside, sitting in the ambulance, Marcus closed his eyes and took a slow, measured breath. The mocking voices, the dismissive attitudes, the constant belittling, it all washed over him like rain off a roof. He'd learned long ago that reacting accomplished nothing. Silence was survival. Observation was power. Jake looked at him, frustrated. "Man, I don't know how you take that crap every single shift. Brennan's a jackass and those nurses are toxic. You should report them." Marcus opened his eyes, staring through the windshield at the city lights. "It doesn't matter," he said quietly. "It does matter. You're one of the best paramedics I've ever worked with. Your assessments are always spot on. You're calm under pressure. You literally saved that kid last month when everyone else was panicking, and still they treat you like you're incompetent." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't explain that this comfortable, predictable civilian mockery was nothing. He had endured worse. Much worse. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Marcus Webb wasn't always a civilian paramedic. 5 years ago he wore a different uniform. He carried a different title. He operated in places that didn't exist on maps, treating wounds that couldn't be explained, saving lives while bullets shredded the air around him. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, 75th Ranger Regiment. Special Operations Combat Medic. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in undisclosed locations. 16 combat deployments. Over 200 lives saved under fire. A Silver Star recipient for extraordinary heroism. But those days were behind him now, buried under layers of mandatory therapy, medical discharge paperwork, and a desperate desire for normalcy. The tremors in his hands weren't from fear or incompetence. They were from the physiological aftermath of too much adrenaline, too many explosions, too many moments where he held someone's life together with nothing but pressure, improvisation, and sheer will. He'd left that world behind. He'd signed the NDAs, accepted the medical retirement, and tried to build a quiet life. Tried to forget the screams, the blood, the weight of dog tags collected from men he couldn't save. This wasn't his first battlefield. The ER chaos was a gentle breeze compared to the hurricane of combat medicine. But explaining that would require revealing a past he'd sworn to bury. "You good?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. Marcus nodded. "Always." The radio crackled. "Unit 12, respond to multi-vehicle collision, Interstate 95 northbound, mile marker 47. Multiple casualties reported. Fire and police en route." Jake grabbed the mic, "Unit 12 responding." As they pulled away from Metro General, Marcus glanced back at the hospital one more time. They had no idea who they were judging. And if he had his way, they never would. 2 hours later, Metro General's ER was in full crisis mode. The multi-vehicle collision had resulted in 8 casualties, 4 critical. Ambulances were arriving in waves, each carrying broken, bleeding patients. The staff was stretched thin, running on caffeine and adrenaline. Marcus and Jake had transported 3 of the critical patients, working efficiently despite the chaos. On their final run, they brought in a man in his early 60s, unconscious, severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding. Marcus had intubated him in the field, a flawless procedure despite the difficult conditions. As they wheeled the patient in, Brennan was waiting, now exhausted and slightly humbled by the overwhelming influx. "What we got, Webb?" he asked, notably less condescending than before. "Male, early 60s, blunt force trauma to head and chest, GCS-3 when we arrived, intubated on scene, 2 large-bore IVs, saline wide open, BP stabilizing at 100/65, oxygen sat 94%, Marcus reported clinically, his voice steady and professional. Brennan nodded, actually listening this time. "Good work. Trauma 2. As they transferred the patient, Tiffany appeared with a tablet. "We need identification. No wallet found at the scene. Do we have anything?" Jake shrugged. "Negative. No ID." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a military dog tag he'd found tangled in the patient's torn shirt at the accident scene. He'd quietly pocketed it, intending to hand it over. He glanced at the name stamped in the metal and his entire body went rigid. Reynolds, James M. 08. U.S. Army. 08. Major General. Marcus's throat went dry. He looked at the unconscious man on the gurney with new recognition. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. Major General James Reynolds. His commanding officer from his second deployment. The man who'd personally pinned the silver star on Marcus's chest. The man who'd held Marcus together when he'd broken down after losing 3 Rangers in a single day. "Webb, you okay?" Tiffany asked, noticing his sudden stillness. Before Marcus could respond, the ER's entrance doors exploded open with a force that made everyone jump. 6 men in military dress uniforms strode in, 4 MPs, military police, a full-bird colonel and a stone-faced master sergeant. Their polished boots struck the linoleum with authoritative precision. The ER went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the monitors seemed quieter. The colonel's eyes swept the room with tactical assessment. "I'm Colonel Davidson, U.S. Army. We received notification of a military vehicle collision involving a high-ranking officer. We're here for Major General James Reynolds." Dr. Brennan stepped forward, attempting to assert authority. "I'm the attending physician. Your officer is in critical condition and we're—" "Where is Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb?" the colonel interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward Marcus. Tiffany's mouth fell open. Jake's eyes went wide. Brennan looked utterly confused. "Staff Sergeant." Brennan repeated, looking at Marcus like he'd grown a second head. The Master Sergeant's eyes locked onto Marcus, and a flicker of recognition crossed his hardened face. "Webb, is that you?" Marcus stood frozen, the dog tag still in his hand. The past he'd buried was erupting into his present with unstoppable force. Colonel Davidson stepped closer, his expression serious but respectful. "Son, we need you. The general specifically listed you as his medical emergency contact. He trusted you once to save his life overseas. We need you to do it again." The room remained in stunned silence. That wasn't normal. Emergency contacts were family, spouses, not former enlisted medics. Sarah whispered to Tiffany, "Did he just say Staff Sergeant? Or Marcus?" "We're here for Webb," the colonel repeated, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "We need the man who earned a Silver Star saving lives under fire. We need the combat medic who's legendary in the Ranger Regiment." Every eye in the ER was now locked on the quiet, unassuming paramedic they'd mocked for months. "Why him?" Dr. Brennan found his voice first, though it came out uncertain. "There must be some mistake. Webb is just a paramedic. He's been working here for 8 months and he's never mentioned any military." "That's because he doesn't talk about it," the master sergeant cut him off, his tone edged with protective respect. "Men like Webb don't brag. They serve, they bleed, they save lives, and then they come home and do it all over again without the uniform." Colonel Davidson turned to address the room, his voice commanding. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment as a Special Operations Combat Medic. He has 16 combat deployments in his record. He was awarded the Silver Star for running into enemy fire to retrieve 3 wounded Rangers, treating all 3 under continuous fire, and keeping them alive until evacuation, despite being wounded himself." The silence was deafening. Tiffany's face had gone pale. Sarah looked like she might be sick. Jake stared at his partner with a mix of shock and awe. The colonel continued, "He's credited with over 200 combat saves. He trained an entire generation of Army medics. And Major General Reynolds once told me personally, if I'm ever dying, I want Webb's hands on me. No one else." Marcus finally spoke, his quiet voice somehow filling the entire room. "Sir, with respect, that was a different life. Not different Webb. Just a different chapter," the colonel replied. "The general needs you now. Are you going to let him down?" Marcus looked at the unconscious general on the gurney, then at the staff who'd spent months treating him like he was incompetent. He didn't feel anger or vindication, just a deep, weary resignation that his past would never truly stay buried. He handed the dog tag to the colonel and rolled up his sleeves, revealing scars on his forearms that no one had ever seen, burns, shrapnel marks, the evidence of a war fought far from home. "Trauma too?" he asked Dr. Brennan. Brennan, utterly shaken, could only nod. Marcus walked toward the trauma bay, and the military personnel fell in step behind him. As he passed Tiffany, he paused for just a moment. "I heard everything you said about me. Every joke. Every insult. I never responded because I learned a long time ago that proving yourself to people who don't respect you is a waste of energy." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the steel beneath the quiet exterior. "But this isn't about me. It's about saving a life. So if you'll excuse me." Tiffany couldn't speak. None of them could. Jake grabbed Marcus's arm as he passed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Because it doesn't define me anymore. I just wanted to help people without the weight of expectations." Inside Trauma 2, Marcus approached the general's bedside. The man who'd once been a towering figure of authority now lay broken and vulnerable. Marcus placed 2 fingers on the general's carotid pulse, felt the thready rhythm, checked pupillary response, assessed breathing patterns, all with the calm precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in far worse conditions. "Brennan," Marcus called out, his voice taking on a tone of absolute command that no one had ever heard from him. "I need a CT scan of his head and chest immediately. He's got increased intracranial pressure. Pupils are sluggish. Possible subdural hematoma. I also heard decreased breath sounds on his left side during transport. Possible pneumothorax. We need to move fast." Brennan, still processing everything, stammered, "I was going to order x-rays first too." "There's no time for stepwise protocols," Marcus interrupted, his eyes still on the general. "I've seen this presentation dozens of times. If we wait, we lose him. CT now, prep for possible chest tube insertion and emergency craniotomy. Move." For the first time in his career at Metro General, Dr. Brennan took orders from someone else. "Get him to CT. Now," he shouted to the staff. As the general was rushed to imaging, Colonel Davidson stepped beside Marcus. "He always said you had instincts that couldn't be taught. Said you could read a patient's body like a book written in a language only you understood." Marcus didn't respond. His mind was already in combat mode, assessing, planning, preparing for every possible complication. They realized, all of them, that they weren't in the presence of a beginner, but a master. A man forged in the crucible of war, tempered by loss, and refined by thousands of hours of saving lives when death was the most likely outcome. The quiet mouse had been a lion all along. They'd just been too blind, too arrogant, too comfortable in their judgments to see it. 20 minutes later, the CT results confirmed Marcus's assessment. Subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and skull. Pneumothorax, collapsed lung. Both life-threatening. Both requiring immediate intervention. Dr. Brennan stared at the scans, his face ashen. We need to call neurosurgery and cardiothoracic. This is beyond emergency medicine. They'll take 40 minutes to get here, Marcus said calmly, already gloved up. He doesn't have 40 minutes. His ICP is climbing. We need to relieve the pressure now. You can't possibly be suggesting. I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what needs to happen. Marcus's voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. I've performed emergency burr holes in field hospitals with nothing but a drill and a prayer. I've done needle decompressions in the back of moving helicopters. This is a fully equipped trauma bay. We have everything we need. Colonel Davidson stepped forward. Webb has my authorization to do whatever necessary. The general listed him as having medical power of attorney in combat situations. This qualifies. Brennan looked around desperately, but the military personnel weren't backing down. Neither was Marcus. Fine, Brennan finally said, stepping aside. But I'm supervising. You're assisting, Marcus corrected, his focus entirely on the general now. Tiffany, I need a chest tube kit. Sarah, get me a cranial drill and burr hole setup. Jake, you're on monitoring. Call out any changes in vitals. Brennan, you're on airway management. Make sure his oxygen stays above 95. For a moment, no one moved, still shocked that the man they'd mocked was now running the trauma bay. Now. Marcus's voice cracked like a whip, and suddenly everyone was moving. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in emergency medicine that would be talked about in Metro General for years to come. Marcus worked with calm precision, his hands steady despite everything he'd endured. Every movement was economical, purposeful, born from thousands of hours of muscle memory developed in the worst conditions imaginable. First priority is the pneumothorax, Marcus announced, his voice taking on the cadence of a teacher explaining a procedure. The collapsed lung is compromising his oxygenation, and we can't operate on the brain without stable oxygen delivery. Tiffany, position the patient's left side up 30 degrees. Sarah, prep the insertion site, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. The nurses moved quickly, their earlier mockery replaced by focused professionalism. They'd never seen anyone work like this, so calm, so certain, so absolutely in control. Marcus palpated the general's ribs, counting down with practiced precision. Here, he marked the spot with a surgical pen. Betadine prep, wide field. We're going to do this right. As the site was sterilized, Marcus explained each step, not for show, but because he'd learned in the military that teaching during procedures kept teams engaged and ready for complications. The key is angle and depth. Too shallow, you don't reach the pleural space. Too deep, you puncture the lung itself or hit intercostal vessels. You want to track just above the rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle that runs below. Jake watched in amazement as his partner, the man he'd worked with for 8 months, transformed into someone completely different. This wasn't the quiet, apologetic Marcus who avoided conflict. This was a combat surgeon operating with the confidence of someone who'd done this while mortars exploded overhead. Local anesthetic, Marcus requested. 1% lidocaine, 20 mils. Brennan handed him the syringe. Marcus infiltrated the site with quick, practiced movements, then made a precise incision, clean, controlled, just deep enough. Hemostat, he commanded. The instrument appeared in his hand. He used it to blunt dissect through muscle layers, creating a path to the pleural space. You never force it. The tissue tells you where to go. Listen to the resistance. He felt the characteristic pop as he entered the pleural cavity. Air rushed out with a hiss, the telltale sign of the pneumothorax releasing. There it is, Marcus said calmly. Chest tube, 36 French. Sarah handed him the tube and Marcus guided it into place with practiced ease, advancing it into the pleural space and directing it posteriorly and superiorly, textbook placement. Secure it, he instructed, and within seconds the tube was sutured in place. The general's oxygen saturation began climbing immediately, 82%, 86%, 89%, 93%. Breathing's improving, Jake called from the monitors. Heart rate coming down to 98. BP holding at 108/68. Good, Marcus acknowledged. But we're not done. The brain bleed is still building pressure. We've bought ourselves maybe 20-30 minutes before herniation. We need to act now. Then came the more dangerous part, the burr hole to relieve the brain bleed. In the civilian world, neurosurgeons did this in sterile operating rooms with full teams and advanced imaging. Marcus was about to do it in an ER trauma bay with basic equipment and no margin for error. He didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. He acted. Everyone listen carefully, Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is a life or death procedure. If we don't relieve the intracranial pressure in the next 10 minutes, the general's brain will herniate through the foramen magnum and he'll die. But if we make one wrong move, if I drill even 2 millimeters too deep, I can cause catastrophic bleeding or brain damage. So I need complete silence unless I ask a question or you see a vital sign change. Understood. A chorus of yes filled the trauma bay. Marcus positioned himself at the general's head. He palpated the skull, feeling for landmarks invisible to untrained fingers. The hematoma is likely temporal parietal based on the mechanism of injury and the CT findings. I'm going to place the burr hole here, he marked a spot, which should give us access to the collection without damaging critical structures. Scalpel, he said, his voice perfectly calm. Tiffany handed it to him with trembling hands, no longer from contempt, but from awe and fear of what she was witnessing. Marcus made a precise C-shaped incision in the scalp, cutting through skin and galea in one smooth motion. Blood welled up immediately, and he used hemostats to control the bleeders, then retracted the tissue to expose the skull beneath. The white bone gleamed under the surgical lights. Marcus took a moment to visualize the anatomy, knowing that beneath this half-inch of bone lay the dura mater, and beneath that, the brain itself. One mistake, one slip, and the general would die on this table. Drill, he commanded. The high-speed cranial perforator was placed in his hand. Webb, if you hit the dural membrane wrong, if you penetrate it, Brennan started, his voice tight with anxiety. I won't, Marcus said simply, his eyes never leaving his work. I've done this 17 times in combat zones. Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places I'm not permitted to name. I've performed this procedure in sandstorms, under mortar fire, in the back of helicopters, and once in a cave with nothing but a battery-powered drill and a headlamp. This, he gestured at the well-lit, well-equipped trauma bay, this is luxury. Watch and learn. The drill whirred to life, a high-pitched mechanical scream that made several people flinch. Marcus placed the bit against the skull and began drilling with gentle, controlled pressure. He'd learned this skill from a neurosurgeon embedded with his unit overseas, a brilliant Army doctor named Captain Torres who taught Marcus the procedure during a particularly brutal deployment. The key is tactile feedback, Marcus explained as he worked, his voice steady despite the intense concentration required. You feel the resistance change as you go through the bone layers. Outer table is hard, diploe is softer, inner table is hard again. When you feel that second hard layer give way, you stop immediately. That's when you're at the dura. The drill went deeper. Marcus's hand was rock steady, his pressure consistent. Years of practice had given him an almost supernatural feel for the bone's density. Almost there, he murmured. Feeling the inner table now, and, stop. The drill went silent. Marcus set it aside and picked up a smaller instrument, a bone rongeur. He carefully enlarged the hole, nibbling away the sharp edges to create a smooth opening about the size of a quarter. There, he said, satisfaction in his voice. Clean burr hole, no dural breach. Now for the critical part. Using the finest control possible, Marcus scored the dura mater, the tough membrane protecting the brain, with a microscalpel. Dark, clotted blood immediately began welling up through the tiny incision. Suction, he requested calmly. A nurse placed the tip in his hand, and he carefully evacuated the blood, watching as the pressure decreased and the hematoma drained. The room held its collective breath. This was the moment that determined everything. Heart rate dropping, Jake called out. 92, 88, 84. BP improving, 112/70. The monitor's alarm stopped. The general's intracranial pressure was decreasing. The brain was no longer being crushed. Within minutes, Marcus had drained the accessible blood, irrigated the site with saline, and ensured no active bleeding remained. The room collectively exhaled. The monitor showed dramatic improvement, heart rate stabilizing at 82, blood pressure normalizing at 118/74, oxygen saturation holding at 97%. That's when respect became permanent. Every person in that trauma bay knew they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Not a miracle. Miracles were random acts of chance. This was skill, honed through suffering and sacrifice, applied with precision and purpose. Jake stared at his partner with completely new eyes, seeing him for the first time. Marcus, you actually just performed field neurosurgery in an ER. I don't even have words. Did what needed to be done, Marcus finished quietly, already moving to dress the wound properly. Same as always. The setting changes but the principles don't. Stop the bleeding. Relieve the pressure. Give the patient a fighting chance. That's when respect became permanent. Jake stared at his partner with new eyes. You actually just did what needed to be done, Marcus finished quietly, already moving to close and dress the wound. Same as always. Colonel Davidson had watched the entire procedure in silence. Now he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. General Reynolds was right about you. He said you were the best he'd ever seen. Said if the world was ending, he'd want you in the foxhole with him. Marcus didn't respond. He was focused on his patient, the man who'd once been his commander, who'd believed in him when he was just a kid from nowhere with steady hands and a desire to serve. Neurosurgery's here, someone called from the hallway. A team of specialists rushed in, led by Dr. Patricia Chin, Metro General's chief neurosurgeon. She took one look at the burr hole, the drainage, the stabilized patient, and her eyebrows rose. Who performed this cranial decompression? Every finger in the room pointed at Marcus. Dr. Chin approached, examined the work closely, and let out a low whistle. This is flawless. Textbook placement. Perfect angle. No complications. She turned to Marcus. Where did you train? Kandahar, Bagram, and places I can't name, Marcus replied simply. She studied him for a long moment. I want you on my team. Permanently. I'm just a paramedic, ma'am. You're a surgeon without the degree, she corrected. And you just saved this man's life with a procedure that most residents would botch. That's not just anything. The general was wheeled to the ICU, stabilized and alive. Against all odds, because of Marcus's intervention, he had a fighting chance. The ER slowly returned to its normal chaos over the next few hours, but the atmosphere had fundamentally and permanently changed. The invisible hierarchy that had existed, where arrogant doctors ruled and quiet staff were dismissed, had been shattered. Staff members who'd spent months mocking Marcus now couldn't meet his eyes. The whispered jokes had stopped. The dismissive attitudes had evaporated like morning dew under harsh sunlight. But something deeper had shifted too. People were questioning their own judgments, their own prejudices, their own assumptions about strength and competence. Tiffany approached Marcus as he was methodically cleaning up the trauma bay, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by genuine shame. She'd rehearsed this apology a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was here, words failed her. Marcus, I owe you an apology, she began, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the sharp, mocking tone she'd used just hours earlier. Everything I said, every joke I made, the way I treated you like you were incompetent and in the way. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Marcus looked at her, and his expression wasn't angry or vindictive, just tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with the physical demands of the night and everything to do with carrying the weight of being constantly underestimated. You didn't know because I didn't tell you, he said quietly, continuing to organize equipment. But you also didn't try to know. You saw someone quiet and immediately assumed weakness. You saw someone who didn't brag and assumed incompetence. You saw someone different from you and decided they were lesser. That says more about you than it ever said about me. She flinched as if physically struck, but she nodded, accepting the harsh truth. You're absolutely right. I was horrible. I was judgmental and cruel, and I let my own insecurities make me tear down someone who never did anything to me. Is there anything at all, I can do to make this right? Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. Treat the next quiet person with respect, he said simply, his voice carrying no malice. Don't wait until someone proves themselves extraordinary to give them basic human decency. Understand that silence doesn't mean absence of skill, that humility doesn't mean lack of confidence, and that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most competent. Learn that lesson, actually internalize it, and maybe something good can come from this. That's all I ask. Tiffany nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I will. I promise you I will. Sarah came next, equally apologetic, her carefully constructed facade of superiority completely crumbled. Marcus, I don't even know how to begin. The things I said about you, the assumptions I made. I'm mortified. Genuinely mortified. Then use that feeling productively, Marcus replied, not unkindly. Let it make you better. Let it make you think twice before judging someone based on surface observations. Then came others. One by one, like penitents approaching a confessional, staff members who'd participated in the mockery came to express regret. Some were sincere. Others were clearly more concerned with covering themselves now that Marcus had been revealed as someone important. Marcus could tell the difference, but he accepted all apologies with the same grace. Because holding grudges he'd learned in the military was like carrying heavy rocks uphill. Eventually you had to put them down or they'd crush you. Dr. Brennan was the last to approach, and his journey across the ER to reach Marcus seemed to take forever. The proud, arrogant physician looked genuinely humbled, perhaps for the first time in his career. His silver hair seemed grayer somehow, his confident posture slightly stooped. "Well, Marcus," he started, then stopped, struggling to find words adequate to the situation. "I don't even know where to begin. I treated you appallingly. Worse than that, I actively undermined you, dismissed your clinical assessments, mocked your experience, and assumed incompetence because you were quiet and didn't boast about your credentials." He paused, seeming to age years in moments. "I've been an ER doctor for 15 years. I've trained residents, published papers, received awards. And I learned more watching you work for 20 minutes tonight than I have in the last 5 years of my career. You're extraordinary, and I was too blind, too arrogant, too wrapped up in my own ego to see it." Marcus finished packing his equipment bag, taking his time with the response. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and deliberate. "I'm not extraordinary, Dr. Brennan. I just had different training and different experiences. What bothered me wasn't the personal disrespect. I've faced worse than words, believe me. What bothered me was that your pride could have cost patients their lives. And I need you to understand this clearly, it almost did." He turned to face Brennan directly. "That elderly man I brought in earlier tonight? Mr. Patterson? The one you said was probably just gas and anxiety? He went into ventricular tachycardia 5 minutes after Jake and I left. If I'd been less thorough in my handoff report, if you'd dismissed the warning signs I specifically flagged in my assessment, if the nurses hadn't been paying attention to the monitor, he would have died while you were still diagnosing gastric distress." Brennan's face went white, the blood draining so quickly he looked like he might faint. "Oh my God," he whispered. I didn't realize." "Exactly," Marcus continued, his voice firm but not cruel. "You didn't realize because you didn't listen. You were too busy being right, too busy maintaining your image as the brilliant doctor who knows everything, too busy putting the stupid paramedic in his place. And that kind of pride? In our profession? It kills people." He shouldered his bag and prepared to leave. "I don't tell you this to make you feel bad. I tell you this because you need to understand that medicine isn't about ego. It's not about who has the most impressive credentials or who went to the best medical school or who can humiliate subordinates most effectively. All that matters, the only thing that has ever mattered, is the patient, their life, their suffering, their chance at survival." Marcus headed toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "You're a skilled physician, Dr. Brennan. You have knowledge and experience that saves lives. But skill without humility is dangerous. Remember that, and maybe you'll become the doctor you think you already are." With that, Marcus shouldered his bag and headed toward the exit. Jake fell in step beside him, still processing everything. "You saved a general's life tonight," Jake said. "You're a genuine hero, man. Doesn't that feel good?" Marcus paused at the ambulance bay doors, looking back at the ER one last time. "I didn't save him because he's a general. I saved him because he's a human being who deserved a chance to live. That's the only validation that matters." He didn't need their apologies. He didn't need their newfound respect. He didn't need validation anymore. He just needed to go home, rest, and come back tomorrow to do it all over again. Because that's what medics did. They served. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without ego. The doors closed behind him, and the ER staff stood in silence, forever changed by the man they'd underestimated. 3 days later, Marcus was called into the hospital administrator's office. He expected paperwork about the general's case or perhaps questions about his military background. Instead, he found Colonel Davidson, Master Sergeant Mills, and Major General James Reynolds, awake, bandaged, but very much alive. Marcus stopped in the doorway, genuinely surprised. "Sir, you should be in ICU." "I should be dead," Reynolds replied, his voice rough but strong. "But I'm not, because you refused to let that happen. Come in, son." Marcus entered cautiously. The general gestured to a chair, but Marcus remained standing, old habits from military protocol. Reynolds smiled slightly. "Still can't break that habit, can you?" "At ease, Webb. You're not under my command anymore." "Respectfully, sir, you'll always be my commanding officer." The general's expression softened. I heard what happened here. How they treated you. Why didn't you tell them about your service? Marcus shrugged. Because it shouldn't matter. I wanted to be judged on my work, not my past. If I have to waive credentials to get respect, then the respect isn't real. That's exactly why you earned the Silver Star, Reynolds said. Not because you're flashy or loud, but because you're competent, humble, and focused on the mission. You don't do this for recognition. You do it because it's right. Colonel Davidson stepped forward, holding a formal document. The Army wants to offer you a consultant position, training the next generation of combat medics. You'd work with Walter Reed, Fort Sam Houston, and deploy with medical units as an advisor. It's a civilian contract, so you wouldn't have to re-enlist. Marcus took the document, scanning it. The salary was triple what he made as a paramedic. The prestige was significant. But something made him hesitate. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, the general replied. But while you're thinking, I want you to understand something. He struggled to sit up straighter, and Marcus instinctively moved to help him. Men like you are rare, Webb. Most people talk. You act. Most people need applause. You need purpose. The world needs more of that. More quiet professionals who show up, do the work, and don't demand credit. Reynolds placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you. Not because you saved my life, though I'm obviously grateful, but because you never let the war break you. You came home and kept serving. That's the real heroism. Marcus felt unexpected emotion welling up. He'd spent years trying to outrun his past, trying to be normal, trying to forget. But maybe he didn't need to forget. Maybe he just needed to integrate it, use the skills, honor the experience, but live in the present. I'll think about it, sir, Marcus repeated quietly. The meeting ended with salutes and handshakes. As Marcus left, the hospital administrator stopped him in the hallway. The board of directors wants to recognize you at next month's gala. We'd like to present you with the hospital's Life-Saving Excellence Award. Marcus shook his head. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. What you did was extraordinary. The staff needs to see that we value. The staff needs to learn that everyone deserves respect, regardless of whether they're extraordinary, Marcus interrupted gently. Give the award to someone else. I'm just doing my job. The administrator looked frustrated but nodded. You're a hard man to honor, Mr. Webb. That's because honor isn't found in awards. It's found in the work itself. That night, as Marcus sat in his small apartment, he opened his laptop and began typing an email to Colonel Davidson. After an hour of consideration, he'd made his decision. He would accept the consultant position, but only part-time. He'd continue working as a paramedic at Metro General, continue responding to emergencies, continue being the quiet professional who showed up and saved lives without fanfare. Because the world didn't need more people seeking glory. It needed more people willing to do the hard, unglamorous work of helping others. The most dangerous people are the quiet ones. Not because they're violent or aggressive, but because they possess competence so deep, experience so hard-won, and character so solid that they don't need to announce it. They simply embody it. Some heroes don't announce themselves. They don't post about their achievements, don't demand recognition, don't require validation from strangers. They move through the world quietly, competently, making it better simply by existing in it. Marcus Webb was one of those heroes. Mocked for his silence, underestimated for his humility, dismissed for his lack of ego. But when the moment demanded it, when lives hung in the balance, he stepped forward with the calm authority of someone who'd already faced the worst humanity could offer and chosen to respond with healing instead of hardness. They wait until the world calls their name. And when it does, they answer not with pride but with purpose. Not with arrogance but with action. Not with words but with the quiet competence that changes everything. In the end, respect wasn't given to Marcus because he demanded it. It was earned because he embodied it. And that made all the difference. The next morning, Marcus Webb returned to work. Same quiet demeanor, same humble attitude, same unwavering commitment to saving lives. But now, when he walked through the ER, staff members nodded with genuine respect. Doctors consulted him on difficult cases. Nurses asked for his input. And Marcus? He simply continued doing what he'd always done. Showing up. Working hard. Saving lives. No fanfare required. The end.